You ever have one of those mornings when the air feels just right, the coffee tastes perfect, and you think, today's gonna be smooth? That was my morning, right up until I walked out to my vineyard and found two men in tactical vests, badges on their chests, flashlights out, inspecting my grape rows like they were searching for contraband. And get this, I wasn't even in their HOA. And by the end, they regretted every second of stepping foot on my land. I stood there at the end of the gravel path, coffee mug in hand, my old dog Finn trotting beside me, tail wagging lazily. The sun had barely risen, leaving a thin gold line just above the distant hills. The vineyard always looked beautiful at sunrise. For me, that land wasn't just property, it was peace. The last 20 years of my life had been spent building that peace grape by grape after decades of chaos working in logistics management. And now, watching two random men trespass and poke around like they own the place, that peace cracked. Finn barked once, sharp, confused, alert. One of the men whipped around like he'd been caught stealing a wallet. "Can I help you, fellas?" I called out. The taller one straightened up, adjusted a radio clip to his vest, then held up a shiny silver badge that said, Property Compliance Patrol. Below it, Ridgecrest HOA. I almost laughed. Almost. "We received reports of unapproved land alteration and possible zoning violations," he said. "We're here to conduct an inspection." "On whose property?" I asked. "Yours," he said flatly. "Parcel 41B. I took a slow sip of coffee. "I'm not in your HOA. They exchanged glances. The shorter man, who had the haircut of someone who took HOA rules more seriously than his marriage, said, "The HOA expansion map includes this parcel. It falls under Ridgecrest covenants now." "Oh," I said. "Interesting, because I own this land outright, and the county confirmed 3 different times that Ridgecrest HOA stops a half-mile down the road." "That's outdated information," tall one said, puffing out his chest. "We need access to your irrigation shed and your barn. Now." I stared at them over the top of my coffee cup. "No." It was one of the most satisfying "no" I'd said in years. That's when he threatened fines. Actual, printed citations, already filled out with my name, which told me something very important. They planned this. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't step closer. I didn't even sound angry. I simply said, "Get off my property." They didn't move. And right there, that's where this whole story begins. Because those two men, those self-appointed HOA cops, had no idea who they were dealing with, or how deeply I understood the law, paperwork, and property rights after working decades negotiating land use permits for major companies. They were about to learn a very expensive lesson. But before I could even decide what to do, the shorter one marched toward my barn like he was entitled to it. Finn growled. Real low. Real old dog protective. "Control your animal," the man snapped. "He's controlled," I said. "But you're trespassing. So legally, he can warn you." "Dogs are not permitted to act aggressively toward HOA officials," he said. I blinked. "On HOA property, maybe. This is my vineyard. We've been authorized by the Ridgecrest board to enter and inspect." "By Ridgecrest," I repeated slowly, "which I am not part of." Tall one lifted his chin. "We can discuss that after the inspection." I took a breath, slow, steady, and said, "You're done here. Both of you. Walk back to your car and leave, or the sheriff will walk you off himself." They didn't leave. Instead, short one muttered, "We'll handle this the hard way." Then he raised his radio and said the most unbelievable thing I've heard in 20 years of dealing with entitled HOA people. "Dispatch, we have a non-compliant property owner. Send backup." Backup? For my vineyard? I couldn't believe it. I actually laughed. Tall one scowled. "Sir, if you continue to interfere, we'll issue a citation." "No," I said, stepping into a sentence. "What you're going to do is get off my land before you make the worst mistake of your week. We have authority here," he insisted with this rigid confidence only a man who'd never been truly challenged could have. "No," I repeated calmly. "You really don't." That's when short one walked directly toward me with a citation pad in hand, pen already poised like he expected me to snatch the ticket out of his grip and burst into tears. "Name," he demanded. "You already have my name. You printed it on that ticket before you arrived." He froze just long enough for me to catch it, the flicker of panic. They thought they were going to bully an older landowner into compliance. They assumed I'd fold like every homeowner in their subdivision. They expected fear. They did not expect a man who had spent half his life negotiating with government agencies, lawyers, and contractors. They definitely didn't expect someone who had every inch of his land surveyed, documented, mapped, and legally rock solid. And they definitely didn't expect someone who wasn't afraid of confrontation. "I'll ask again," I said. "Leave." They still didn't move. So I turned around, walked back to my porch, and called the sheriff. Now, here's the thing about small counties. Everybody knows everybody. And Sheriff Dalton? I had coached his kids' baseball team 16 years ago. He still owed me a favor for helping him cut through red tape when he improved the County K-9 facility. "Morning, Jack," he said when he answered. "Everything okay?" "Got a couple Ridgecrest wannabe cops on my vineyard claiming they have authority here." A long pause. "Are they armed?" "Probably only with paperwork and bad attitudes." Dalton chuckled. "Stay where you are. I'll be there in 10. He was there in 8. When the sheriff's truck rolled in, the HOA cops actually tried to wave him down like he was the one trespassing. I watched from the porch as Tall One marched right up to Dalton and said, "Sheriff, this is an HOA matter. We have the right to inspect this land." "No, you don't," Dalton said bluntly. Tall One sputtered. "We have documented authority. You have a whole lot of—" "Nothing," Dalton interrupted. "This vineyard is outside Ridgecrest jurisdiction by half a mile. And I know that because I signed the confirmation map myself last spring." Short One stepped forward. "This land was added recently." "No, it wasn't," Dalton said. "And I don't appreciate you trespassing and calling in backup like you're running a police department." Tall One puffed up. "Sheriff, we received reports." "From who?" Dalton snapped. "The only neighbors anywhere near here are half a mile away, and they wouldn't call you if their house was on fire." I couldn't help smiling into my coffee. The sheriff turned. "Jack, you want to press trespassing charges?" I hadn't even considered it, but watching their faces pale, it was tempting. Tall One swallowed hard. "This is unnecessary. We're only doing our job." Dalton shook his head. "Your job is to monitor your HOA members, not wander onto private farmland and act like you're federal agents." Then came the moment I didn't expect. Short One muttered, "We were told this parcel would be annexed soon." I narrowed my eyes. "By who?" "Your neighbor up the road," Tall One said reluctantly. "Mrs. Clarington." Ah, there it was. The queen of Ridgecrest HOA. A woman known for running that neighborhood like a medieval kingdom. A woman who once fined a man for having the wrong brand of mailbox. A woman who believed anything near her HOA should fall under her control. Suddenly, everything made sense. She had sent these two on a fishing expedition literally to find something wrong, anything wrong, so she could pressure the county into annexing my land. Sneaky. Entitled. Classic Clarington. The sheriff shook his head. "You gentlemen are done today. Leave. Now." They finally walked off, red-faced, humiliated, muttering about how this wasn't over. But oh, it was over. Just not for me. As soon as they were gone, I looked at Dalton. "You think she'll try something else?" He sighed. "Jack, she always does." And he was right, because that was only the beginning. 3 days later, I got a letter. Certified mail. Fancy stamp. Bold letters. Notice of HOA inquiry. Signed by, of course, Mrs. Clarington. Inside was a printed packet accusing me of 23 violations. 23. On property I didn't belong to their HOA for. Unpermitted structures. Unapproved fencing. Noise violations, I live alone. Unauthorized agricultural activity in a zoned agricultural district. And, my personal favorite, improperly placed wildlife. She had actually listed deer as a violation. I walked straight to my porch and laughed until Finn looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Then I got to work. See, what Mrs. Clarington didn't know was that I kept impeccable records. Every permit, every zoning designation, every receipt for every fence post, irrigation line, and outbuilding. I had everything to prove my land was completely outside her reach. But I didn't want to just fight her. I wanted to end this. Entirely. So I dug deeper. Pulled old plats. Pulled county maps. Pulled property lines dating back to the 1960s. Then I found something interesting. Clarington's own property line had an error. A big one. A previous surveyor had drawn a border that shaved off 10 feet of her backyard. 10 feet she thought she owned but didn't. And guess whose land it actually belonged to?
Mine.
Now, I'm not a petty man. But there's something about someone invading your peace that awakens a part of you that remembers every time somebody pushed you around in life. Every time you stayed quiet. Every time you let something slide. Not this time. I contacted a surveyor I'd known years back, a guy named Russell. He was meticulous and fast. 2 days later, he confirmed everything. Then I filed the corrected boundary with the county. Then I built a fence. Right through the back of her prized rose garden. Not a tall fence. Not an obnoxious fence. Just a simple, clean, fully legal post and rail line that marked exactly where my property ended. It drove her mad. She confronted me the next morning, storming down my driveway with such fury, she looked like she'd walked through a tornado and brought it with her. "You have no right," she shouted before her feet even reached my porch. "I have every right," I said calmly. "This is intimidation." "No," I said. "This is property law." She jabbed her finger toward the vineyard. "Your land should be part of Ridgecrest. It's practically touching our border. Half a mile is not touching. It's close enough. For you," I said. "Not for the county. Not for the law." She fumed. "You don't understand. Your property affects our neighborhood."
How?
I asked. "My grapes offend you? My sunrise blocks yours? My soil is too loud." She spluttered. Actual spluttering. "You know exactly what I mean." "No," I said. "I don't." Then came the truth, dripping out like poison. "Your land is valuable," she hissed. "Too valuable. If Ridgecrest expands, our HOA value increases. Our jurisdiction expands. Our community improves." "And mine?" I asked. She stared at me like I was an inconvenience. "You should be proud to join us." "No," I said simply. "I shouldn't. You'll regret fighting us." "No," I said again. "But you might regret picking a fight you can't win." She stormed off without another word. But she wasn't done. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, I held a letter from the county zoning board. Someone had filed complaints about my vineyard operations. Anonymous, but clearly her. Noise violations, pesticide misuse, improper drainage, agricultural hazards. All false. But the county still had to investigate. A lesser man might have gotten frustrated. But I'd learned a long time ago that the louder someone fights for power, the more holes they leave in their own armor. So when the county inspector came by, a younger guy named Mateo, I greeted him with a thermos of coffee, a folder of documents, and a smile. "Sorry you have to waste time out here," I told him.
He sighed.
"Honestly, Jack, half the office knows Clarington is behind this. She's notorious for this kind of thing." He inspected everything. Found nothing wrong. Signed off clean. But then he said something that stuck with me. "You know," he murmured, looking over the land, "the county's been talking about adjusting district boundaries. Ridgecrest has been pushing for expansion." "Into agricultural land?" He shrugged. "They're persistent." That was the moment I realized something. If I didn't shut this down hard now, they'd keep coming. So I decided to do something Ridgecrest never expected. I petitioned the county to designate my entire vineyard as an agricultural heritage site. A protected status. Meaning no HOA, present or future, could ever annex, regulate, or interfere with it. But that wasn't all. I also proposed a wildlife corridor extension through the 10-foot strip of Clarington's backyard that legally belonged to me. That land would become protected habitat. And she couldn't plant, build, pave, or touch it without violating environmental regulations. A month later, after hearings, paperwork, and one very helpful presentation, I received approval. My vineyard was protected forever. But the real moment of justice came when the county mailed notices to affected neighbors, including Clarington. She received a letter informing her that a portion of her garden was now legally protected land, and she could no longer remove vines, prune, or modify anything without county permission. The day she confronted me about that one, oh, it was glorious. She marched up again, waving the paper like it was a crime scene report. "You did this," she shrieked. "I protected my land," I said. "That's all. You're ruining my property." "I didn't touch your property. I just established the correct boundary." "You're vindictive." I shook my head.
No.
"I tried to let you walk away that first day. You chose not to." She glared at me, hatred boiling in her eyes. "This isn't over," she hissed. But it was. Because 3 days later, I got a call from Sheriff Dalton. "Thought you'd like to know," he said. "Ridgecrest HOA officers have been issued warnings for unlawful trespassing. Their board is being reviewed for overreach. And Clarington, well, she's stepping down." I blinked. "Stepping down?" Dalton chuckled. "Board voted her out. Too many complaints. Too much drama. They're tired of her." I looked out over my vineyard, golden sunset washing over the rows of grapes.
Peace.
Finally, Dalton added softly, "You handled this better than most would have." I smiled. I just protected what mattered. And I did. Not with anger. Not with revenge. With knowledge. With patience. With persistence. Because sometimes people think they can bully you just because they have a title or a badge or a clipboard with pre-filled citations. But land, real land, doesn't bend to ego or entitlement. And peace? Peace is worth defending, even against an entire HOA. And in the end, they were the ones who regretted setting foot on my vineyard.